Jobsworth, Season 1, Episode 10, Cycles of Success. Welcome to episode 10 of Jobsworth. Yep, we've just hit double figures. My guest for this episode is Danielle Howell, a hormonal cycle optimisation coach, there's a tongue twister for you right there, who's empowering not just women, but entire organisations to harness the power of hormonal cycles for better productivity, mental health, and overall well-being. From her own life-changing experiences to her eye-opening TEDx talk, Danielle brings a wealth of knowledge and personal insight into a topic that's often overlooked or on too many occasions swept under the carpet. I do mention it in the episode, but I approach our conversation from a position of nigh on complete ignorance, one which many listeners might be able to relate to. A big thank you to Danielle for not rolling her eyes once during this chat and for leaving me with so much insight and advice that I've been able to use to support and better understand the women in my life. Whether you're a man or a woman, an employer or an employee, this conversation could change your life. So without further ado, let me introduce you to a woman on a mission to show people, both those with and without periods, how hormonal cycles can go from being a pain to being a superpower. Danielle Howell. Danielle, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. What an introduction.
Well, it's all true. I mean, I'm mindful that I needed to do a fair amount of research before going into this, Danielle, because I am going to caveat everything with the fact that this is all a little bit out of my comfort zone, the conversation we're about to have. But I think that's the whole reason I wanted to have it, because for so many people, this topic, especially as a man talking about this with you, I think it is going to test those barriers and those boundaries of comfort. So I'm willing to dive right into it. And hopefully the listeners will be too. I think it's such an important topic to be discussing. So absolutely. Before we kick off and go into what it is you do and talk about your journey as well, I do have an opening tradition on this podcast, and it's a question I ask everyone when they come on. The question is, when you were younger, so school age, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, I love that question. If I'm honest, I never had a real passion for anything specific. There's probably two things that come into my mind. With the first being, I remember a conversation once, someone, I think was probably very young, someone saying, what do you want to be when you grow older? The typical question of a child, isn't it? And I think the answer I gave was something along the lines of, I want to be a taxi driver so that I can drive all the old people around to where they need to be.
Oh, wow. Okay. That isn't where I thought the end part of that was going to go, but that's a really lovely sentiment behind that. Okay.
Well, I think it actually kind of works with what I'm doing now, because obviously I had a desire to help people get from where they are to where they want to be, which is ultimately what I do, along a slightly different line.
It's the journey. Yeah, I like it.
And the second thing, I do have memories of sitting in school. And do you remember the old stencils that you used to get that had all of the letters of the alphabet and some other little symbols on there as well? I remember setting that up on my school desk, on the desk, pretending it was a typewriter or a keyboard as we have now, and sitting there and just typing away, pretending to be sitting in an office and doing work. So it wasn't necessarily a specific job, but definitely had a desire to be, I guess, feeling productive and that I was, in control of something that I was doing there.
Yeah, interesting. Well, they're both great answers, and you're always allowed two, so that's absolutely fine. And actually, the taxi driver kind of analogy is really nice. You are helping people on that journey from A to B in a very different way. You're not physically driving them in the back of a car. But yeah, I kind of like that one. When we were talking about career guidance at college or secondary school, I think back when we were going through that process, there were two routes primarily, weren't there? And it probably was, at the time I was going through college, and it was banking, finance. It's basically get to the city, find a job in finance, or find a job as a PA and EA in a support capacity. And they were kind of your routes in, weren't they, as well? And the world has changed dramatically since then. But it's interesting to just see what routes we were inspired to follow. And I think at that time, going to the city and getting a job was probably that box is checked. You're on the ladder, and that's a good thing to do.
And I honestly thought, I'd won the lottery. I felt I'd hit the big time by getting that first job in the city. That was a huge step for me.
Yeah, and it really was. I think from all the social markers that we would have been judging success by at that time as well, it really was. And I have to say, looking back at your career, and we'll go into that a little bit more now, it was the start of something successful because you had a varied career, but a really interesting career. But we'll talk through that.
How long is this podcast? How long do we have?
Well, as long as it takes, as long as we both have this morning. So we're going to go on to your background and let's sort of touch upon your career journey. Can you share a bit more about your personal journey that leads to you becoming a hormonal cycle optimization coach? And it's going to take me a little while to get my mouth around saying that a few times. But then maybe let's backtrack slightly and start with your earlier career. So you go to London and you get your job in a legal firm. Give us a potted history of what happens over the next few years to bring you up to where you are now.
Always test my brain a little bit to go back that far. Giving away my age now as well, aren't I? I went in as a receptionist, and I think it was about 6 months in when the law firm actually approached me to then go in and be a secretary in the law firm. And again, I was absolutely stoked with that. I didn't have a plan as such, but obviously I had shown the skills that were needed to actually transfer into that firm. And I learned a huge amount in those first years of just learning about business generally, but I was very specific in property law, and I learned just so much about even moving house. At that age, I hadn't even bought my own first house. So to learn that whole process was actually just a really good life skill as well as a job that I was doing. So I went in and did that. And then I think again, maybe it was a year, something like that. And I'd started to see, I don't know if you remember this actually, I used to get the train up to the city and you'd get off the train at Liverpool Street and there would be these magazines that were always shoved in your face as you were trying to walk through the platform with hundreds of other people. And these magazines had all these different jobs. It was literally, what's the equivalent of now, an online newsletter of different vacancies. It was full of vacancies and full of PA jobs and legal secretaries, law firm jobs. And I remember seeing a few of these and seeing the salary and thinking, wow, okay, that's quite a significant amount more than I'm earning. And these were big city law firms. Where I was a smaller law firm, more of a family-run type business. And so, I went from that law firm and I went and put myself up for an interview at one of these big top 10 law firms and just thought, wow, will I get that? That's a real bold move. And I did. And it was, I think at that time, a £10,000 increase, which was huge in one move. And I stayed there for a few years. And in fact, that was actually Herbert Smith, where I've returned, I've left and returned. It's a company that it's quite close to my heart, I have to say. And they've always treated me very well. And I've had some great experiences with them. But I think after about a few years in that particular role, I started getting, what can we say? I felt like I wanted to do more, but I couldn't really understand what more meant. And I actually then decided to take a job locally as a conveyancer. So going back into the whole property, I wanted to progress, but I couldn't, because I didn't have a university degree at that time. I couldn't become a trainee at Herbert Smith or any other big law firm because that just wasn't how it worked. So I took a conveyancing job in a local law firm and quickly realised that just wasn't for me. It was a lot of pressure for someone who really didn't have that much experience, and I felt very out of my comfort zone.
Can I just interject and ask, how old were you at that time, Danielle?
I probably was around 20.
Okay, so that's still very early on in your career, isn't it?
20, something like that, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe actually 22. Let's go 22. I'm trying to work out when did I have the big 21st birthday party?
Yeah, that feels like it's less of a thing now, the big 21st birthday party, but I remember having exactly the same thing. But yeah, go on, carry on. It was just trying to kind of get an idea of the chronology.
So I left there and decided, you know what? Let's go and get that degree. But I didn't do law. I did something that I thought I would just find really interesting, which was tourism and leisure management. And I went to a local university in Chelmsford. I went to Anglia Ruskin and I just drove there every day. I didn't have the full university experience of living on campus or anything like that, but I loved it. I love learning, and I have realised that over the years. although it was something I'd never worked in, I really just found it super interesting, again, from a personal perspective, not just education or focusing on what the career would look like. And from there, I ended up going a little bit left wing and going into wedding industry. So I was doing a bit of wedding planning, wedding events. So I would actually go and set up all the tables, and I'd actually be sort of a manager for the day to help things run smoothly, which then led me into a golf club where I was actually selling the venue as a wedding venue, and again running events there, which also coincided with this role of selling golf membership, which I literally knew nothing about, and gym membership as well.
Wow, that's a lot of hats that you're having to wear in that golf club for sure.
It was, but again, I loved it. And that's probably, if I'm being honest, one of the jobs that I've loved the most in terms of actually doing the job.
Did the team around you, the people around you, play part of that? Because I used to be in the fitness industry for 8 years, and actually some of the best jobs I had were working in gyms with a good bunch of people. It's like the people support network, and just, it's having a laugh. So was that down to the people around you as well?
I think so, a little bit. I could probably say that about a lot of jobs that I have had, actually. But I think in terms of my skills and I loved the weddings. I mean, just seeing all of these different types of weddings and meeting different people, and it's something people come in really excited to talk about, and it's just a real positive experience as a job, and that was what I loved about it, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So post golf club, where do we go beyond that?
Well, so after a couple of years of doing that, as much as I loved it, I'm going to be honest here and say money, because you're working locally. I was on a commission. Well, I had a basic salary, but plus commission. I think I just felt, compared to what I was doing back in the city prior to this whole phase, I was earning a lot more money, and I had that internal battle of, do you go money or do you go something you're really loving? And there was probably another element to it where it was a local kind of family business, and things weren't maybe quite as structured as I had in the law firm. And that's not a criticism, it's just a different way of working.
Yep.
And for me, I missed that structure of the law firm. And some people might go in there and say it's far too structured, but it's regulated. It has to be to a degree. So I had this calling to go back. And again, so I reached out to people from Herbert Smith that I knew, and there was a demand for a role which I was told would suit me quite well, and I went for it. And this is probably a theme that you'll see with the conversations we're having here. I just went for it because that's the kind of thing I will do. I will just see an opportunity and say, let's go for it. And if it's meant to be, it will be. And if it's not, then something else will come that will take me in a different direction. And I do tend to live a little bit like that.
Yeah, which will sit and resonate with a lot of people. And for some people, it will make them feel incredibly uncomfortable because it is just a subjective approach to how you feel about work and how you kind of dive into those opportunities. I've been similar. I mean, I took a job in recruitment because I went for a beer. I was scaffolding at the time. It was freezing cold and I was working outside. I went for a beer and someone offered me a job in a nice warm office in the middle of December. And I said yes to it because I thought it can't be any worse than what I'm doing now. Let's give it a go and just dive straight into it. And 12 years on, I'm still doing it. But
look at you now, yeah.
That approach resonates with me. What is kind of an archaic view now of how you approach work, having to work with a company until you retire, just doesn't exist anymore. So talk to us about that. So it was a return into a more structured, let's say more traditional work environment, going back into the city, back into a law firm. So what was the role that they've said you'd be good at? So
this was another legal PA role. And It was for a group of partners, a specific group within the law firm. And yeah, I started, I think I was there doing that role a good couple of years. I actually got on really well with the team. We had a very good working relationship, and to move away from that was quite an interesting one. So an internal opportunity came up, and I remember feeling really bad to have to go to my bosses, the partners, and say I was actually wanting to move. And I remember one of the partners said, well, you won't get the job. And I kind of stood back.
Supportive.
Oh, okay. Why is that? He said, well, I simply won't let them take you.
Well, that's a nice way of saying you won't get the job. So, okay. So they're just going to sabotage your opportunity more than anything else.
Which of course he didn't do. That was him all over, and exactly how he would approach things. And I took it and understood exactly what he was getting at. And I took it as a compliment, for him to not want me to go was a huge compliment.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't need us to say I did get the job.
I can imagine you did, yeah. But it's nice, isn't it? You make impressions on people along the way and they don't want to let you go. And that's the testament to obviously the work that you were doing at the time. Going back to your childhood aspiration of being a taxi driver, taking people on a journey from A to B, again, I mean, that metaphor for change management, isn't it, ultimately? Taking people on that journey. Yeah, I mean, great. It's brilliant that it's spun round to connect again. So change and systems change kind of ties in with that innate drive within you to try and help people as well. So there are those boxes ticked. And again, it's a great example of your comfort of diving in and grabbing an opportunity with both hands. I mean, if anyone's looking for some advice when they're thinking about career opportunities, if you can do it, if you can just force yourself to kind of put your toes over the edge and just take that leap, sometimes it can really, really pay off.
This is one of the reasons why I got into coaching in the first place. I remember being at a Christmas lunch and someone I was working with asking me about things that I was doing in my life and different jobs that I'd had. And he actually said to me, my goodness, you need to go and do this as a job to help people to take that leap, to have the confidence to make those decisions, because you've clearly done things and it's worked for you and you've got an opportunity to help people. And I did sit and think, oh, yeah, whatever. But it's interesting how that's actually come to fruition in a number of years later.
Yeah, I think there's an element of imposter syndrome as well, isn't there? Or feeling like, why would anyone want to listen to what I'm saying when you're first told maybe you've got an aptitude to help people? Because half the time, and I don't know what your internal monologue is like, it's like, I can't help myself. I need to get my shit together, my own shit together before I can ever hope to try and help other people and whatever they're going through. So did you get any of that? Was that kind of the narrative going in your head to a degree at that time?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Although I make bold decisions, I definitely have those phases where I think, what the hell am I doing? And can I actually do this? I say yes to things, but on the day I'll rock up and be literally crapping my pants. Yeah. But, this whole thing of glass ceiling and pushing through, if you really want to achieve things, you just have to go through that. There's no easy route. Yeah. So you have to take those leaps.
It's really good advice. It's really good advice. Nothing happens. What is the cliche? Nothing grows in the comfort zone. I think that is it. True. Maybe it is, but it is. There is an element of truth. It's a horrible, cheesy cliche, but I'm going to stick with it. So connect the dots for me, because it's change management, and looking back through what you did, it was a successful run in change as well. And I think we've got a few mutual connections from the work that I do in change management from a recruitment perspective. But connect the dots for me now from how do you go into that change space and then to the job that you're doing now, which is, and I'm going to try and get better at pronouncing it, hormonal cycle, HCO coach. Can I say that? Can we just use the acronym? Right. So connect the dots for me.
And just to make a point on that. So I came up with this name. I mean, coming up with a business name is one of the hardest things, right?
Oh, completely. Yeah.
I came up with this and then started using it and practically was like, this is impossible to say, even from my efforts. So that's why I decided, let's shorten this to the HCO coach. And if I ever did that again, I would definitely rethink that. So anyone thinking about setting up a business, really important, keep it short.
I'll jump in there as well and say that completely resonates, because my company name is Global Tech Collective. If you try and say that quickly when you're introducing yourself on the phone, it is a tongue twister. So GTC has just been born from that, basically. But anyway, so company name aside, as an HCO coach, how do you go from change to where you are now, or at least making that decision to move into where you are now?
Yeah, so I have the pandemic really to thank for that, where I was at the time. So I was a contractor and I was in a very fortunate position where I would go into firms for around a year-ish, do my job and then have a few months off, which was amazing to actually do things that I wanted to do. I took 6 months off to go and do an Ironman, and at the time of the pandemic, just before that, I actually took time off to then go and do this triathlon coaching out in Mallorca. And it wasn't a paid job. It was just something that came up, an opportunity again that I said, oh, absolutely. I have very basic, the first level 2, I think it is, fitness coach, something that I considered doing a while back. But they wanted people to come along that could share experience and could resonate with some of the people that were out on camp that weren't professionals, that were just people that really loved triathlon and wanted to improve, but aren't going to be flying down the road at 50 miles an hour. So I could go and spend time with those people to really tell them my experiences of triathlon. And I've got many of those stories as well. And to be able to help people and give them that confidence they needed to push forward. So when the pandemic hit, we were out there and things changed ever so quickly, like they did everywhere around the world. And it was a very quick 24 hours where we had to just decide, let's get everyone home and let's all get out of here, because Spain was quite strict, weren't they? They really locked down.
Yeah, definitely.
And we didn't know what was going on. So it was a case of come home, and I moved back in with my parents, so I wasn't isolated for the lockdown. And I struggled to just sit around and do nothing. So I thought, right, let's take the opportunity and actually think about a business, because I don't know right now where my next job is going to be coming from. It was a very uncertain time. And I just started Googling all sorts of things, as you do. And the opportunity of a health coach came up. And I just read some more about it and thought, you know what, this sounds really appealing and something I would love to do. The qualification of a health coach and a life coach was this bundle that I could do and study for a number of months to get that qualification. And I thought, hey, let's jump in, because we just don't know what's coming. And I wanted to be busy and do something that would benefit me. And so I did that and decided to set up a business, and I would say very softly launch it. And that was mindset and personal development coaching. And in fact, my actual company name is New Vida Limited, which means new life.
I saw this, yeah. And I was going to ask the meaning, because I had no idea, but that's a really lovely concept.
Sort of a mix of languages, but we spent hours. My mum and dad, I think, loved lockdown, just sitting there, spending time with me, coming up with business names.
Brilliant. That's great.
And so I started to do that. And obviously with how things were at that time, people were isolated and people did want that extra support to focus on themselves a little bit more. And I was doing everything on Zoom, and it was a lot easier to do that than it ever had been in the past. And so that's what I did. And I did that with a lot of people that I knew already. I wasn't really going out and getting, marketing my business and getting clients from elsewhere. It was very much, I would say, a low-key kind of launch and a low-key run business. And then I got pregnant with my daughter, and I took a little bit of time off to have her, and I decided just to stop things and take some time out. I can't tell you exactly when it was, but I just had one of those light bulb moments where I started to see lots of talk about menopause, which was great. But I started to see some more talk about cycle tracking, which was something that I have been doing probably for about 5 or 6 years. I could see then, when I thought about all the women that I'd worked with, there was a pattern that was emerging of them not showing up for sessions or not doing the actions that we had set. And I could see that actually it was hormone related. We'd had those conversations. It's time of the month, and I'm going to blame that. That's my reason. And I just thought, there's something here. There is something that I can really genuinely help people with. And so this whole world opened for me, where I started to look into this a lot more and decided to then, in September last year, and properly I say, relaunch my business and actually make it more of a business than a hobby. Really push it to do what I can to help more people. The rest is history, as they say, isn't it? It's just gone from one strength to the next. Obviously, you mentioned my TED Talk, which was just a mind-blowing opportunity I never imagined would come my way. But guess what? Yeah. I jumped in.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about that in a bit more detail as well, Danielle, your TED Talk, because there will be lots of people listening to this, and I'm going to name drop one of them, a chap called Mark. I won't mention his surname, but Mark will be listening to this wondering, how do you get that opportunity? Because I know he's desperate to try and get there. So we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But to go from relaunching a business to then the TEDx stage, and then to have your TED Talk shared on their YouTube channel, that is quite the rise, isn't it? That's an incredible thing to have achieved.
It really is. And even now, and we talked about Jen earlier, and she always says to me, you need to talk about it more, because I kind of forget it happened and it's past, and yes, it's a great thing, but it's very easy. I'm quite a humble person, really. I don't like to go and shout about this stuff, but I know equally it really helps with people knowing the authority that I have, that I'm able to give these messages, to deliver these messages.
Yeah, I completely agree. A lot of my services are around consulting and advising people to get comfortable selling themselves. I think it's a British thing as well, this inbuilt humility, or maybe even this feeling that if we talk about our achievements too much, it feels like a brag, or it feels like we're showing off, when really something like that deserves the airtime, Danielle. I thought it was amazing. And I've got a couple of questions on the back of that TEDx talk. But yeah, what a journey. And it just shows the running theme here is embrace the opportunities, take those openings with both hands and dive right in. And I think in your case, it's really worked out. It should be inspiring for a lot of people listening to that story up to this point. Can I ask a question? And I wasn't going to ask it, but this is me embracing this uncomfortable situation or uncomfortable conversation and just trying to maybe shine a light or hold the torch for other men that may not have wanted to ask this question, but it might have come up. Why were you tracking your hormonal cycles at the time? Was that to do with contraception? Was that to do with trying to conceive? Can I ask that question?
Of course you can. And no, I literally read a book one day. It sort of somehow, I think someone recommended it to me for no real reason other than it was just be interesting. And it's called Period Power by Maisie Hill. Mm-hmm. And I read this book, and you ever get a book where you read it and you just start like nodding, literally constantly saying, this is all now making so much sense.
Yeah.
And I read it and it blew my mind as to a lot of the experience that I'd had throughout my life, really, in terms of this fluctuations. Now, I will talk about jumping into things. It would be lovely to be able to look back and say, when in my cycle was I making those bold decisions and taking those leaps? Because I do equally have those moments where I literally question myself, and can I do this? You know, who am I to go out and talk to people about this stuff? And so going back to your original question, I read the book and I just found it really interesting. And so I started to track my own cycles purely from a perspective of just inquisitiveness, if that is even a word, just curiosity, just wanting to know. I mean, later on, it has actually proved very useful in, conceiving. That was quite interesting, knowing exactly when I did conceive, and then also going forward from that, knowing when not to conceive, to, using it as contraception to actually know when other times to avoid having sex, because at that time, didn't want to have another baby on the way just yet.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I guess I wanted to ask that question because the mind goes to, there's a lot more press and a lot more discussion now around hormonal cycles and tracking them from both conception and contraception. But also, I guess, I completely understand. I'm nodding along as you're talking about reading a book where you're just nodding along. And there've been plenty for me over the years. But one that started me on a journey was a book called Lost Connections by Johann Hari, and another one he did called Stolen Focus. They're my examples of books where I read them and I'm like, there is a message you're telling me here that either resonates and makes me feel like I'm not alone, or it makes me think, that's why I'm feeling like I'm feeling. Maybe I need to explore that further. So the fact that you were tracking kind of shows that you're, I guess you're carrying through with what you're preaching to people, aren't you, ultimately? Because you're seeing the correlation between these periods of productivity and then periods where maybe you do feel like you've got imposter syndrome and you do feel like, have I got the skills and the confidence to go out and do this? Would you put all of those, let's say, peaks and troughs of I'm going to term it as confidence or self-belief, can they all be connected to your hormonal cycle?
No, you may have external factors that are influencing that. That this could be coming down to how you were brought up, or, the environment that you're in at that time. It's not necessarily all hormones at all. But you'd be surprised how much your hormones can influence that. And that's what's really interesting when I work with people and they have those moments of kind of realizing that, oh my God, my hormones are really influencing how I'm literally living every single day.
Yeah. Okay. So what does the role of your job as an HCO coach actually entail? Talk me through what it is you actually do with the clients that you work with.
So it depends. I mean, I kind of have a number of different hats I wear. So I do speaking where I just go and provide that awareness. And as you say, to both men and women, people with periods, people without periods, to give them that understanding of what the cycle actually looks like, how it can impact people, and if you are someone with periods, how you can use that to your advantage. With one-to-one clients or with a group program, it's very similar, but really digging down a little bit deeper into that and what that really looks like. So I do teach people how to actually track their cycle, because that is something we should all be taught, probably at school, to be honest. And I hope that things are starting to change in that world, but I really hope that is something that comes into the curriculum going forward.
Yep.
Learning how to track, learning how to connect with your own body, to understand the signals that it's sending you, because we often overlook it or we see it as something else. We give it another purpose, another reason. And it's working through with people how to do that tracking, how to connect. And then for the optimization piece, it's about this leveraging that power. So there's so many different ways it can impact you. We've just talked about confidence. That's literally one element. We could be talking about procrastination, how much you can focus on things, the different types of work that you want to be doing at different times. So going and doing a talk, you're obviously, going to feel more confident, but equally you're going to be more energetic and you're actually going to speak more eloquently, because the way that the brain is working is different. Whereas when you come to your period and the weeks before that, you're more inward focused. You definitely got that imposter syndrome coming in. You're actually going to want to focus on more analytical tasks, more deep work, but probably more on your own. So that collaboration piece probably could be a bit of a struggle at that time.
Right.
So there's so many different, this is literally scratching the surface. There's so many different elements. So what I do with people is we work through what are their challenges, what are the things they're finding they're inconsistent with, what are they finding? One week they're amazing, smashing it, and the week later they're literally dreading it so much they spend 3 hours doing something really, really simple because they just can't focus on it. So we look at that and we put systems in place to help them to structure their workload, if they have that ability to use the right skill sets and the right energy that they have throughout the month to make things feel a lot easier, to make you go to work and want to do those things because that's what your body wants to do on those days. And ultimately that makes you be a better person and be more successful in your career or your business. An interesting one, obviously, talking to you about recruitment, when do you schedule interviews? So there's limit sometimes, isn't there, as to how much control you have. But if you went and had an interview when you're ovulating, for example, you're probably going to get the job because you're going to go in there feeling confident. You're going to literally physically glow and you're going to speak really well and be able to sell yourself, versus a week or two later where you show up to that interview with massive imposter syndrome. Why am I even here? And to be honest, you may even not get through the door. You may have that internal battle before you get there and turn around and think, I'm not even going to bother going. And you go there, you just can't get your words out. You're fumbling, you're unfocused, your mind is just crazy. It's going mental at like 1,000,000 miles an hour. And you probably walk out, and even if you have done a half decent job, you'll probably walk out thinking, oh, well, I didn't get it because I'm crap. And this can really impact your mindset, just so much. So does that make sense as a kind of working example?
Completely, yeah. And to be honest, that's the sentiment that I took from your TEDx talk as well. And it was so enlightening. There's elements of it that I took as a recruiter. This is why I think it's so important for you to have more of a platform to be able to speak to both individuals and also, we're going to speak about in a bit more detail, organisations around what they can be doing to support their people with this. But yeah, it makes complete sense. And I wonder how many people or how many women I've worked with over the years that would even have heard of this concept or then factored that into when they're booking in interviews as well. I'm not going to make this all about me, but I know in terms of recording the podcast, and you do mention that men have a cycle as well, and I'm really interested in that. I'm not going to hijack this topic of conversation, but I wonder if that impacts us in the same ways as well, because there are definitely times where I am more focused on this. It's usually for Vegan or not, to be honest with you, but there are times where I'm more focused and in the zone with recordings or live talks or anything like that. So it resonates on both a personal level, but also I think it's such an important message to be speaking to people about. I'm going to touch upon a few more questions, and it might feel like I'm going all over the place, but there's just so much to cover in what it is you do, and I'm genuinely interested in it. But let's talk about periods in the workplace and the stigma around it, and how you can help organizations start to broach those, what are still kind of taboo conversations. So what do you do? How do you even start broaching the topic of periods in the workplace with the businesses you consult with?
Yeah, it's a tough one sometimes because people, to be honest, don't even feel comfortable having the conversation with me about potentially bringing it into their business. That's the first hurdle that I can hit sometimes. But the ultimate goal is to create an environment and a workplace where people do feel comfortable. And that really stems from communication. That's one of the main parts. There is, interestingly, a new British standard that's just recently been launched on not just menopause, but menstrual health generally in the workplace. And I think that's a great step forward for companies. It provides some really good support in terms of how to put these processes into place to actually create that safe environment, to create that safe space, to create forums for people, networks for people. And it's quite interesting because I've seen, a couple of years back when I was in corporate, I saw lots of women's networks, whereas now I'm having conversations and the women's networks are no longer there because that was felt unequal. Men didn't have a network as well. So there's different types of networks being created that seem to be a combo.
It's definitely interesting. Is it positive or negative in your opinion?
I feel there needs to be a space for women to have some conversations. There also needs to be a space for men to have these conversations. And there is a space to have them together, right? I feel like there's options for all three. I used to be part of a women's network, and we always invited men along, and that actually was good because it showed the people who were willing to be more open to that and to embrace it. And you kind of then could gauge where people were, whether they were supportive or not so much. And I think it provided the awareness. I feel there needs to be a space for all different types of groups of people. And I do appreciate, as a business, you can't have millions of networks. It wouldn't be feasible to run those kind of things. It's a tough one, but I do feel a safe space for me to go in and talk to people. I think you do need to have different messages for different people. And something like this, if we're not yet there in talking about it, to bring it in where you've got all sorts of people there, it's not always comfortable. And I think we need to maybe take small steps to get to where we want to be.
Yeah, gender equality and how men and women are treated in any size of organisations, I think is quite a sensitive topic, and again, completely subjective, and loads of people have different views. But I do completely agree with what you're saying in that, especially around this topic specifically, I think it's really important to introduce men into the conversation to ensure that we are clued up and knowledgeable, and we can support the women in our life, both personally and professionally. But you do need a safe space where women can talk freely about it, because some people can have different levels of comfort in having these conversations with men present. The risk is always that business is going to create all these networking groups and it becomes very siloed. But I do think we need to find a mid-ground, especially with this kind of topic.
I agree. But we do also have to think about that we have people who are non-binary, we have people who are transgender, people who have periods who don't identify as a woman. So there does need to be a way for me to be able to connect with those kind of people, because their experience is quite different and actually can be quite challenging for them, particularly in the workplace, where they are experiencing these cycles and yet they can't talk about it in the same way as someone else just saying, oh, it's my time of the month. They can't have that conversation. So that's also a whole other area of challenge for people that are identifying as that, because they're really restricted and it just has many limitations for them in the workplace.
And this, I have to be honest, was such a complex subject. This is exactly why businesses should be talking to you. If all you're doing is focusing inward on how your organisation can help without getting external expertise, it's going to be an incredibly hard subject to tackle. So yeah, there's a lot of sensitivity around a lot of things we're going to discuss over the course of this next half hour or so. But yeah, bringing men in on the conversation, I think, is important. But at the same time, creating safe spaces for everyone that wants to get involved in the conversation, I think is equally so as well.
I've had literally three men over the past 2 days come to me and say, I just want to understand it more, because I see the patterns and I see the fluctuations. And I'm seeing that as maybe something I'm doing wrong, or there's something a bigger issue here that I need to know about. And they're saying to me, if you can just tell me the basics so that I understand, I will be able to be exactly what you say, a better husband, a better father, or just a better colleague if we're talking about the workplace. For you to be a better colleague or a better manager, it just has so many benefits.
Interesting as well, because when I first was introduced to your TED Talk through Jen, I listened to it with self-serving to a degree, but I could better support my partner. Not at any point did I see it from a broader perspective of how managers and leaders can better support the people going through that in the workforce as well. Do you find in your line of work that you get many male leaders come to you? Or is it a case of, with the businesses specifically that you work with, do you feel like it's women banging the drum and starting the conversations? Or do you get many men reach out to you and say, I want to be a better boss, I want to be a better leader, more compassionate, more empathetic?
Oh, I would love to be in that place. But if I'm being completely honest, we're not quite
Please do,
there.
yeah. Okay.
I am getting men come along because they are inquisitive. They do want to learn more, which is amazing. And I will celebrate that as a step forward. But to be where you say, and the men are coming forward and driving the conversation, would be amazing. So anyone out there listening who wants to do that, then this is your opportunity to change how we're doing it.
This is the call to arms. I think we should be banging the drum for much more of that messaging as well. And it's a shame in a lot of ways, but you're so early on in the journey, Danielle, that hopefully opportunities to speak like this and your TEDx talk and all of the live speaking events you're going to be doing really start driving it into these leaders' minds that they need to be putting the hard graft in and they need to be putting the work in and reaching out to you, not just relying on women to bring this subject to the forefront.
So John, as a recruiter in what you do, I would say thinking about when people come to you and have conversations or they're sending you messages, having that awareness of, well, where could they be in their cycle and why are they turning around tomorrow and telling you, actually, I'm not going to go for that job anymore, or, actually, I don't think I'm capable of that. Trying to understand, and obviously you can't just say, well, do you have your period today? That would be totally inappropriate. But it's just the awareness and having that awareness to maybe say, give it a week, see how you feel in a week, because their mindset might shift, their energy might shift, and their confidence might shift. So it's just having that awareness can make all the difference.
That is something that I'll take away on the back of this conversation as well, because it is very easy to just go, okay, well, look, it's not the right role for you, or take something on face value without just testing the water slightly. And the worst scenario is ever that you go, are you on your period, or is it your time of the month? And we've all seen horror stories of how that's received when
that's not my advice.
That definitely, Danielle does not condone this message. But I think, just leaving that window open, I think is quite important rather than just shutting the door completely. So it is advice that I will definitely take. Okay, I've got more questions. If you are speaking to a business that are open to this conversation about trying to support and create environments where people are more supported, what are practical tools that you can offer to people generally, but I guess to employers as well, on how they can support their people? And I don't want you to give all of your secrets away here, Danielle, but if you can give us some tips, some actionable advice maybe that people can take away from listening to this episode.
It might depend a little bit on the type of business and the structure of the organisation. I actually had a live conversation on Instagram last week with a business owner who runs a biscuit company. They make branded biscuits, some amazing biscuits, by the way. The Biscuitery, a little plug for her there.
There you go.
But we had a great conversation because she's actually put into place a process where they are a group of women, all women in their business, and they have a whiteboard with magnets, and so they have everyone's names, and they have different colours for each phase of the cycle, and with a little guide on the side. So what they do is they put the colour of the magnet next to their name when they're in each phase. So that's their way of bringing that awareness without having to say to people, leave me alone, I'm cranky today, or equally, I might be super energetic and a bit OTT today, which might be too much for you. And so it's kind of giving people that signal without having to do that. She was sort of explaining to me how productive that's made the team, because they're just able to, well, firstly, collaborate better because they have that awareness. But actually, she's leveraging people's strengths. So they may be going to events where they're needing people to have that energy. So they're able to tap into, well, who's got the most energy right now? You're going, because that's going to work really well. If you haven't got the energy to show up and do us proud as a business, then let's not do that. So that's really been really interesting. So that's obviously a small business where they can do that. You know, when you're talking about huge corporate organizations, it's maybe not quite so easy to do those kind of things. For the larger corporate organizations, there's definitely a place to just, it's about respecting, I think, is the first thing. The awareness and respecting. Yes, don't go and ask, are you on your period? Just please avoid that. But having that awareness to be able to understand that somebody may just need a bit more flexible working that day, if that's a possibility, maybe working at home rather than being told they've got to come into the office. Again, I know sometimes there's limitations, but having that flexibility to offer it can be a real support to people, because there's the confidence, there's the emotional side, but there's also the physical. Some people coming into an office when they are potentially heavily bleeding is a really uncomfortable thing. And that is hard if you've not had a period before to understand what that feels like. But to sit there at a desk where you could be also really hot, the aircon may be equally too cold, you may feel cold. And if you're really worried about leaking, that's a horrible thing. You can't focus on the work that you're doing. You can't be productive because your mind is elsewhere. And if you're going into a meeting room with loads of people, it can just be really intimidating and feel very uncomfortable. So having that respect to maybe offer some flexibility in location and working hours as well. Maybe people just need to take a few more breaks. Now, there's a thing, isn't there, around trusting your employees, because some people might say, and I have heard it, oh, my employee just wants to take breaks to just have a rest. Well, that's not a good working relationship. There's no trust there.
Yep.
If you can trust your employees that they need that time for them to be able to come back and do a better job, then that's a win for everybody.
I completely agree. And I think it's really interesting the kind of tools that you were saying that smaller business use. You can build them on scale as well, but I think in bigger businesses, it all starts with just having the respect is a great word to use, being comfortable enough to have the conversation with your leaders or managers or directors, whoever it is, to be able to say, this is what's happening with me. So you need to foster a culture where that's okay. There's no stigma or taboo around it. And that for a lot of big businesses is not what's been happening for decades and decades and decades. So, change management, it's a big cultural shift for so many organizations, which again is why they need external specialism to go in and advise them on how best to do it. You made a really good point. I'm going to ask two questions on the back of both points you made. Let's start with this one. You mentioned the four phases, or you mentioned phases, but 4 phases of the hormonal cycle. For someone like me who has never heard that there are 4 phases of the hormonal cycle before, can you explain what they are and that why understanding what those phases are would benefit your life as well, or the well-being and of people that can get clued up on that?
Absolutely. And you're not alone. So many people don't appreciate there's 4 phases.
Yeah.
So effectively, everyone with a period is having a cycle last around 28 days. And it's really worth mentioning every single person with a period is going to have a different experience. No 2 people are having exactly the same experience. But there is this typical, I guess, framework of what a cycle looks like. And you probably heard it in the TED Talk, and you'll hear it if I talk in any other place about the seasons, because it's a really easy way to remember it rather than the science words that can be a bit jargony.
Yep.
So if we start with the period, because that's the phase everybody does know, that is your winter. And it is literally, and you'll be able to resonate with this. It's winter, it's cold. You want to just probably lie on the sofa, grab a blanket, get cozy and eat crappy food.
Yep. That resonates completely. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is exactly how a person who's having their period is going to feel. They're probably very lethargic, their mood is very low, and they'll probably be a bit emotional. So you may see some tears. But that is all just reflecting the drop in hormones that has happened for the period to take place. Okay. Then a period will last, say, 3 to 5 days approximately. And again, some people will have longer, some will have shorter. Then you go into this spring phase. And so from a science perspective, the hormone levels are actually rising. And so that reflects in your energy. Your energy levels start to rise as well. Often this is the most creative phase for people. It's when they can do some really good content creation if they're sort of a content creator in their job, if that's their sort of media or marketing. This is the phase to leverage that. They will definitely feel more motivated, whatever job they're doing, just more positive, more energetic. This is probably one of my favourite phases, actually. I think this is my favourite because it's just where things are starting to shift and you can see more positively, everything's looking better. And that's a great time to start new projects, tougher tasks that maybe you didn't want to tackle last week, and learning as well. Your brain is actually adapting. I can't really state this as a fact because I need to go and get my source for it. But I think your brain changes around 25% throughout the cycle. And that just highlights to you, it's not just a physical thing. This is your brain is actually changing throughout the cycle. So then we go into summer, and this is when you're ovulating. And I've said this before, it's like the David Attenborough programs where you see a bird or an animal that's coming into mating season, and they do a little dance, don't they? They get really confident and cocky and puff themselves up. But we're doing the same thing. You will start to see it. Once you start to see the pattern and you start to track, you go, oh my God, this is happening. You feel confident. You want to go out, socialize, dance on the tables, whatever it is you want to do. And this is the time for networking, interviewing, asking for a new job, asking for that pay rise. You've just got that edge about you. And if you are sort of a business owner and you're creating content, then again, social stuff, going live on Instagram, perfect time. If you're doing the kind of job I used to do, change management, going out and engaging with end users, I mean, you are on fire at that time. And if you're a salesy type person, a sales type person will make lots more sales during this time because they are just attracting people and people want to buy from people, right? So if you're giving off this really positive vibe, people will buy from you. And then it does start to dip a little bit. So you go into autumn where, similar to the sort of season of the year where it cools, and this you are going to go more introverted again. Even if you're an extrovert, you will still have a level of introvertism. Is that a word? You will. I think
so. We can go with that.
Let's go with that. You will start to just focus more inward. And you might be a bit moody, you might be self-critical, and it's because those hormone levels are getting ready to drop significantly for your period. This is the time, again, to probably work more by yourself. Stuff that you would do, sort of your typical admin tasks. For me as a business owner, like finance review, and I hope my accountant isn't listening. It's not the thing I love, but this is a time to actually do that because your head and your brain is in a space of coming to the end of a cycle. So it's feeling like you want to close things down, get things ticked off the list so that you're ready to move into a new cycle. So I have one client actually, her day 24, which is as she's coming towards in her autumn phase, she is super productive in a sense of, I want to get everything done. I just want to get everything done and off my plate. And that's because she's in her autumn phase, coming to the end of her cycle and ready to start a new cycle. So, are you still with me? Does that make sense?
I'm completely with you. And again, I keep using the word resonates, but I had a quite a candid conversation with my partner this morning who said, I just went into the kitchen and said, are you okay? And again, as a man, I don't know whether even that's the right question to ask, but I just had a sense, been together 12 years, and I just had a sense that maybe the winter was coming. I mean, it sounds like I don't mean to quote Game of Thrones or Jon Snow, but winter was coming. So I just said, are you okay? And she said, yeah, I feel like I'm about to come on my period and this is happening. So the seasons and the way you describe it just fires this imagery off my head, and I can remember specific periods, specific moments during the course of the month where all of those things really kind of align as well. So again, for any specifically men listening, I'm sure women are nodding their heads while listening to this, but for men, we can all probably relate to the seasons that you're describing there. So 100% with you.
I mean, if your other half is tracking her cycle, she will be able to tell you exactly the day that her period will come, rather than I think it's coming. And this isn't about being able to predict in advance. It's taking her temperature every single morning. And this is something so simple, but we're just not taught. So if she takes her temperature every single morning before she gets out of bed, and that's a critical piece, she's able to know, I can tell you, the day I take my temperature and my temperature actually drops by about 0.3 of a degree, I know, oh, today it's coming. It's really, yeah, it's that amazing. And I love that, because I spent years where you'd be like, oh, is it coming today or not? And you go out feeling very uncomfortable because it's that really weird, uncertain period. But period again. But yeah, if she's tracking, she will literally be able to know. And yes, it's great that she's in tune with how she's feeling, so she know it's approaching. But the more you can take the next step and actually really get control of your cycle and know exactly when different things are happening. On the flip side of knowing when your period's coming, you'll know exactly when you're ovulating, because the temperature goes up again. So it's being able to look at the data that's actually telling you what's going on inside.
Yeah. Giving men an opportunity to be able to support their partners better, or any women in their life. I think if you are knowledgeable enough to know what phase you're going through when, you're better to equip them with the support that you might need. So if you do need more support, if you need less support, if you just need to be left the hell alone, all of these things, are really going to be helped by tracking your cycle. So I can see that straight away. My partner will love listening to this. I'm not going to keep talking about it because she'll be she wouldn't want me sharing too much. But anyway, that's all good. Okay, I think you've answered in describing the phases. I think you've answered there as well what the benefit is of tracking 100%. Okay, so going back to businesses and this idea of being able to advise them on how to create more supportive environments for people that are having periods or having their cycle. There will be businesses, as most businesses do, that look at what's the return on investment if I'm going to pay for this. Now, I asked this question to someone, and it was we were talking about ADHD and well-being and creating supportive environments for people with neurodivergent challenges. And her response was incredible, and I'll share that with you in a second. But for businesses that are sat there a little bit cynically and saying, what's the ROI that we can expect? What do you say to businesses that are looking at it from that perspective?
I mean, you could have some amazing people working for you that are just inconsistent in how they're performing and how, what their productivity is looking like, purely because of their hormone cycles, and they may not even be aware themselves. So if you're able to help with the education piece, that may not even be supporting them, it's actually just educating them, providing that opportunity, then actually they may themselves be able to turn it around in terms of being more productive because they're able to focus on the right things at the right time. Equally, if you can provide that support, I think it helps with loyalty, doesn't it? And people staying with companies. We talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
If you're able to feel comfortable and in a safe space where you're given that respect and you're trusted, then you're more likely to stay somewhere. And the other thing I would say is around actually attracting the best talent that's out there, because now I have seen other women going for jobs and asking these questions. Do you have a policy on menopause? Do you have support around menstruation? And the more it's talked about, the more it will start to become commonplace in the interview stage as well. So, on a job spec, if you want to be able to highlight that you're supportive of this, people are going to love that, to say, amazing, I know I can go here and they're going to support me, even though I may have fluctuations throughout the month. And that is a great way to be able to attract the best people as well.
It's a fantastic answer. I do a lot of advisory around employee value proposition, which and there's a lot of focus at the moment on menopause support policies and updated policies that HR teams are rolling out all over the place now, and they should be. And I posted a couple of articles about why menopause is such a taboo subject to talk about within companies and business in general as well. I think awareness is key. So just building awareness, the education piece 100%. Again, I think that aligns really nicely with what so many businesses should be trying to do at the moment. But as an employee value proposition, in a way, it's low-hanging fruit. Everyone within a business is going to be impacted by this in some way, shape or form, whether it's directly from them going through the cycles themselves or colleagues that have to support their people or managers that have to support their people. So this is something that all businesses should now be doing as part of their employee value proposition and what they're building and what they're offering. So I think that's a fantastic answer, and it's a no-brainer. How can you say we don't want to invest in that? It's impossible. Is my opinion.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. I think you're absolutely right, though, and the common thought process is just to focus on the women, and actually it is so much bigger than that. That's one element, but actually, yes, to provide the education piece for everybody and to allow them to have that communication improved can only be a good thing for not just talking about periods, the better relationship you can build between colleagues. It will help with collaboration generally and help people to work together to support business strategy. It just brings the business together to work in the same direction.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's that cohesion, isn't it? Collaboration is a key thing that all businesses are trying to build and trying to improve upon. And half of that is breaking down the barriers, isn't it? And breaking down boundaries that have existed for centuries as well. And it's great that these conversations are now being started to be had, although there's still a huge stigma around it. So if we can start getting everyone to feel a bit more uncomfortable at first, and then hopefully by the end of the conversation feel more clued up and knowledgeable. I was going to ask about how understanding hormonal cycles would benefit male employees, but I think it doesn't need to be as specific as that. And I think you've answered the question really. It's not about benefiting male employees. It's about the business, the direction, and everyone being supported. I have to ask the question because you mentioned it in your TEDx talk about male cycles. I mean, it's really interesting to me. I've been accused of being on my period before because I've been in the mood, Danielle, and I'm just going to tell you, and it's happened quite a lot of times. Now, I don't know if there's any truth in why I was in a mood at the time, but talk to me a little bit about male cycles. Is there any chance of they run the same kind of season description that you gave before?
Well, no, actually. And this is why it's so interesting, particularly with the workplace, because the structure of the workplace effectively replicates the structure of a traditional male cycle. Interesting. And I know the workplace is changing a little bit, but what we're talking about is a 24-hour cycle. So you, John, you'll wake up in the morning with high levels of testosterone, and gradually throughout the day, they will drop. And then you'll wake up tomorrow and it'll be the same. Now, obviously, that's quite generic. Obviously, there may be people that are slightly different to that, but that's the typical stereotype. So for you, you do get obviously variations. You may be a morning person, you may be an evening person. I know you were emailing me late last night, so I'm going to assume you're an evening person.
With a 5 and a 2-year-old, I have to be a morning and an evening person. So there's kind of like I just switch off at some point. But yeah,
that's so true. So traditionally, what you would see is the workplace opening up in the morning, men coming in, probably being quite social in the morning and actually wanting to network with other people, have morning meetings and, what are we doing today? And kind of getting that work mode kick-started. It would then gradually decline. Maybe in the afternoon, they'll focus more on deep work by themselves. Then happy hour comes and they want to go have a little wind down before heading home to just chill. And I don't want people to think I'm saying every man just go home and chill, because I know many men don't do that. This is just purely the traditional stereotype of the hormones as they are working throughout your body in the day. Yep. So yeah, that's sort of how the workplace has evolved, which is why it's hard for women to sometimes fit into that typical 9 to 5 regime, because their hormones aren't working in that same way.
Okay. That again is a really insightful point, because I was not aware. Again, I saw this in your TED talk. The imagery and the graph that you show just shows how, in a way, how messed up it is, and how the current system of work is kind of working against women to be their most productive. Because you show this graph, and it's exactly the way you describe it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm all about gender equality, don't get me wrong. And I think it's amazing how the gender gap is closing. But we do have to, at the same time, respect that we are physically different. And so for years, women have just been trying to push through all of this and be consistent day after day. And I hear it every day on, messages that are coming through. Be consistent, be consistent. And I've read some amazing books as well that you talked about, Power of Focus, The Miracle Morning, Atomic Habits. All of this stuff is about consistency, all written by men. So it's about taking those elements of those books and actually being able to adapt it to the right phase of the cycle to allow that consistency to come through, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. And I think that's going to be like a knowledge bomb, which I was always hoping we're going to be dropping in these episodes where we having discussions with specialists in these fields. But I think a first for a lot of men to hear, but probably the majority of women listening to this, that our working day is really structured, again, maybe unsurprisingly in a way, around men's cycle and not fit for purpose for women. And I guess in a positive way then of how the pandemic affected all of our lives, with all of this flexibility now that is open to us for the first time in, again, decades across genders, I think that hopefully is allowing women to have environments that work better for them. Would you agree with that from what you're seeing in the conversations you're having?
I absolutely would. I think it's been a real game changer. I'm starting to see more organisations recalling employees because they want to go back to the old way. And I think some women, not just women, but I do see women finding that a challenge because they have found that so beneficial for them to be able to live more in line with their cycles. They can sit at home on the sofa in their pajamas and do work on a couple of days if they need to. And that's okay because they're still doing the work and they're still getting it done, but just in a different way. So I hope that we don't go too much back to what it was, because I think it's been a huge eye-opener for businesses to see how people can be trusted, can have that ability to work in a different location. It can work, and we've proved that. So to go back would be a real shame, because I think absolutely, as you say, it's really benefited, in my opinion, women, but obviously I'm sure men as well.
Oh, completely, yeah. And I think a lot of consultancies are starting to call their people back into the office 4 or 5 days a week now, and that's the driver. And they're citing these productivity studies to say that productivity's dropped, which I just think is, I try not to swear too much, but it's bullshit in my opinion. And there's an agenda there. They are driving that message because they're leading the company in a way where they don't allow trust and they don't allow people autonomy. And I think if we add to the fact that what we're doing again is not allowing people to have environments that work for them, driving them back into the office 9 to 5, that's only going to, first off, impact productivity, but also lead to attrition. People leaving businesses to go to the companies that are still offering that flexibility. So I hope this kind of surge that we're seeing stops soon, because there is really a push, and I think it's the wrong thing to be doing. Okay, right. I am so thankful for the time that we've spent doing this, Danielle, and I think there's so much. I mean, we could speak for hours because it's such
we literally could.
It's such a complex topic as well, but I think so much of what you've discussed is going to empower people. Hopefully it leads them to do their own research. Hopefully it leads them to reach out to you as well. Tell people how they can reach out to you. So if they're interested in working with you either one-to-one, or it's a business, hopefully men from businesses as well, that want to reach out to make sure that their people are being supported with increasing their knowledge, improving their knowledge in this area. How do people reach out to you?
So I have a website, www.thehcocoach.com. And originally that was the hormonal cycle optimization coach.com. So obviously that got shortened.
Had to change.
So thehcocoach.com. Now on there, I do have some information about specifically workplace stuff that I do. So you can download that and just take a look. Equally, if anyone wants to just email me to set up a chat, I would more than welcome that. And you can just email me, Danielle@thehcocoach.com. If you want to see content, I am on LinkedIn and I am on Instagram, thehcocoach.com. There's a theme. And I do try to put stuff out there just to help people, give tips on things of how to do this better, to provide that awareness a bit more. But yeah, if you want to contact me directly and talk specifically about what it is that you need, then obviously I would welcome those discussions, particularly from the men. Come on,
Come on, yeah, we really need,
this
needs to be a call to action for men to get in touch as well. And I'm going to include all of the links to that into the podcast description, including, it's 15 minutes long, your TED Talk, I think, from start to finish on YouTube. But it flies. It provides so much insight and value. And for anyone that listens to that, men or women, it just makes you want to learn more. So that 100% the link to that will go in the podcast description.
I should say I do have a one-page guide, which if anyone's listening and wants to get their hands on that, it just really simply breaks down the 4 phases and how you should eat differently during those phases, how to move differently, and what kind of work to focus on. You can download that by going to the website, thehcocoach.com/free-stuff. And you can download your copy, and that will be quite a good thing to just pop on the wall and remind yourself.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And again, I'll share the links to that when we start promoting this episode. Right. Danielle, I'm conscious we've overrun on this, but I do have a closing tradition on this podcast. Other podcasts have closing traditions where a previous guest, I'm not going to name the podcast, but previous guest leaves a question for the next guest. I don't do that.
I think I may know, yes.
Yeah, you might have heard of that one. I don't do that. I get my mum to ask my guest a question at the end of each episode. So she knows roughly who you are. It's usually a hasty call on the morning of a recording and saying, Mum, I've got this guest. Can you please think of a question to ask? I don't listen to the question beforehand. I just play it down the microphone to whoever my guest is, and Mum will ask it. So if you permit me, I'm going to play the question, and let's see what Mum has asked this time. Let me know if you can't hear it at all.
Hi Danielle, I've always been fascinated by the fact that if women are together for a period of time, their cycles will eventually marry up. Have you ever seen this happen with the companies that you work with? Thank you.
There you go. Did you hear that first, Danielle? Was that loud and clear?
I love that. And that's a really great question, actually. Well done, Mum. Good question.
My mum's name is Lisa, if you wanted to direct an answer to Lisa. But yeah, thank you for that, Mum. Appreciate that.
Good question. So Lisa, yes, and that's a really interesting one. So cycle syncing is the term used for that, as well as tracking. So often when I talk about cycle syncing, people think I mean that about different women's cycles all syncing at the same time. But it's not necessarily what I'm referring to. But to answer the question, I definitely see this, and I have experienced this. I have 2 sisters, and we've had this in our house where, we do end up syncing together, and I find it absolutely fascinating. Now, traditionally, we're going back to many, many years ago, where you'd have communities of people, that they would actually find there would be almost 2 camps. One where you're having your period together, and one where you're having ovulation at that time. And how that seems to have evolved is it enabled the group of people that were having their period to just take a step back and do what they need to do to be better at self-care. And then the other group would be able to step up because they had that extra energy and were able to step up and support those other women. And wow. This is, as I say, going back years, but I find that fascinating that actually happened. And now how much of that is myth versus fact, I don't know, but I've certainly read about it. But there is a definite case for people syncing if they're in close proximity to each other. But equally, there is a lot of work done around the moon cycles. Now, I'm not massively woo, I'm much more about practical tools. But I know there are people that have strong beliefs that you are aligned to a moon cycle. So that is why we find women all then syncing up, because they're actually responding to how the moon is moving around us at that particular time. So there's a whole world of research to be done there.
I mean, we could do another episode on that, yeah. But that's a really insightful question. You never know what you're going to get when my mum asks the questions, and some of them are complete curveballs. But that was very relevant. So thank you very much, Mum. I appreciate that, and thank you for indulging it as well. So, Danielle, it's been an absolute honour to speak to you, and thank you for being kind in the way that you've answered my questions, because it's a topic that I, and I'm sure so many people are so ignorant to or about and around. And it's a genuine drive of mine or motivation to try and get more clued up. So I can support not only the women that I'm close to in my life, but also people that I'm helping to find jobs and align with the right opportunities. So I'm sure so many people listening to this are going to have taken so much inspiration from it as well. And your story about how you started in the first place, because that's the other thing we do here. We talk about why you're doing what it is you're doing. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being kind in the questions that you were answering.
You're very welcome.
It's been a pleasure.
I'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Jobsworth. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to like and subscribe. You can stay connected by following me on LinkedIn for more insights on the world of work, behind the scenes content, and updates on upcoming episodes. We're already thinking about guests for season 2, so if there is a particular topic you'd like us to discuss, then please send in your suggestions to hello@jobsworth.com.